evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're more than welcome to another episode of the Coffee at 11 show on a rainy Tuesday here in lockdown in Ireland. And it is my great pleasure. This is episode 67 of the Coffee at 11 show, brought to you by wigwam.ie. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Raymond Sexton, who's my special guest this morning, all the way from Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. Raymond, you're more than welcome. Please say hello. Show us your coffee mug.
Hi, Colm. Delighted. It's a bit late for coffee at this time of night, but I'll have a go.
I love it. I love it. What time of the night is it over there?
Oh, it's just gone 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. in the evening. Yeah, so it's not too bad. Very civilized.
8 p.m. Well, very civilized. I'm delighted that you've chosen to join us. I hope it's decaf, but I'm delighted you've chosen to join us. Folks, let me just tell you a little bit about Raymond before we bring the man himself in to find out about those early years when he started out in Limerick. So Raymond Sexton is obviously his name, business name, Tangible Ireland and Tangible, your global partner. What does your business do? Consultancy, education and outreach. How long established? Since 2001. How many employees? 2, with multiple collaborators and partners. And that is true on a global scale. Raymond is an experienced professional in business growth, infrastructure delivery, strategic implementation or community development. He completed an MBA at Melbourne Business School in 2016 after 30 years plus experience, 10 in Australia and 20 over in Europe. And he's delivered critical assignments for a variety of clients through his technical and management knowledge, coupled with exceptional interpersonal skills. He has a unique ability to develop a deep understanding of multiple stakeholder perspectives. And that's absolutely true when we get into the tangible stuff to talk about in a while. Areas of expertise: social and economic development, professional services management, certified resolution, stakeholder management and community relations, fundraising, education, and in recent years better known as the prime mover, the main mover behind the Tangible Leadership Series, which seeks to promote social and economic regeneration through supporting business and civic leaders in Australia, in the States, in Europe, and all around the world. And something nobody knows about Raymond, but it's not surprising, voted best scout of camp at St. Patrick's 7th Limerick annual camp in Dunmore East in 1972. There you go. First bull of bus. Best scout. Raymond, lovely to have you in the cafe. Thanks for joining us. Would you oblige and take us all the way back to those early years, pre-scouting days? Who is Raymond Sexton, please?
Snotty-nosed kid. Grew up in Leela Street, or what was known as Roxtown Terrace, or anyone in real Limerick City would know the Long Can. It's only later in years we found out that there was a Magdalene laundry inside the walls of that Good Shepherd convent. But I grew up there. Went to St. Patrick's School out to Dublin Road. And one of my best friends, Fergus Gloucester, used to live next to the park there in Clare Street. So we used to say he had the biggest back garden in Limerick, because we'd go into his house and out through the hedge and into the big the big park. So what else? So I got into scouting when I was 8, and I just loved it. I mean, it was just phenomenal. It was like, and I mean, sometimes people mix up about scouting. They call it a youth movement or whatever, but in those days it was a way for legitimately getting away from your mother pulling your chain. So basically, if you were down the end of the corner causing trouble, you were causing trouble. But if you were down to the scout hall and you were causing trouble, you were at scouts. So it sort of, it was one of those good cover stories. You could do devilment at scouts, but it was legit. The scout hall was up Rabogue Hill. I saw it last year. It's probably derelict now, but we were a great crew. Scout leaders, and Kieran O'Hanlon, I think he's a mayor or a councillor. He was one of the big leaders when I was growing up. We did Bob a Job. Think about it. I door knocked all of Castletroy, all the Dublin Road. Just think of the child welfare. Just think of the forms that you'd fill in now to do Bob a Job, or it's mind-boggling, right? So went all over Ireland. We did camps, and the reason I'm talking about it is because it's probably given me I probably learned more about management in scouting than I have since, in spite of all the different inputs, because I was made a patrol leader when I was 11, and I had 2 or 3 guys older and bigger than me in my patrol. So the old routine of threatening people wasn't a good idea. So you had to learn how to stroke people's egos and find their hot buttons and whatever. So I liked scouting, the adventure, did everything, and that's why I went back. That particular moment in 1972 was very special because I was caught completely by surprise. And generally, if you're up for an award or something, you kind of get some little early warning. Someone tips you, and says you might be in luck tonight. But on that occasion, I just got completely overwhelmed, and I was a new kid on the block, and I can still remember the moment at a big campfire. So now that's a long time ago, so that'll tell you how big it is. Do you want me to keep going, Colm?
No, hang on a second. Let me come in on that, because I too was a scout, 74th in Edenmore in Dublin 5, and I see Mary Healy, aka Mary Marin, is on the call. Mary, you're very welcome, friend of mine from those early days, and now living in Melbourne. And but scouting was huge, absolutely huge back in the day, and it was such a formative part of clearly your formation as it was mine. PL and APL, patrol leader and assistant patrol leader. I wrote those down as you were talking. It brought me right back. What colour was your neckerchief, by the way? What colour?
Well, we were green and white. We were St. Patrick's, so we felt very special, but it's interesting, when I came to Melbourne 4 years ago, a guy reached out to me on Facebook, and this is where Facebook's amazing, and a fellow called Johnny Butler, and I hadn't seen Johnny Butler for something like 40 years. And we met up, and it was just phenomenal, because the affinity that we had, like if people are awkward or shy or grumpy or whatever it is, they don't change that much as they get older. So we clicked. We got on well when we were kids, and we got on instantly. It was like as if the time hadn't been gone. It was amazing.
I love it. The 40 years just melted away. Love it. Well,
we used to go on long camps. You see, people forget nowadays. People go down and they make scones for half an hour, and then the parents pick them up in their cars or whatever, right? But we used to go to Kenmare, Dunmurry, Stradbally, Spansel Hill. One year we spent 15 days in the rain at Spansel Hill. I re-erected the marquee tent 3 times. I stitched it together twice. It was so miserable, but no one was up for going home. It was just,
it's
60 days with people.
It's interesting to hear that analogy. These days, half an hour and make some scones, and Mammy drives you there in the 4-wheel drive and picks you up. Back in the day, we literally mucked it in together. Somebody on the show in recent weeks said that she fears that she had the last ever childhood. I think it was Bridget McLaughlin. She couldn't be here this morning, but she fears that she had our generation, if you like, had the last ever childhood, and she could be right. Listen, great stuff. That sets the scene beautifully. So we'll move on from scouting up through those early career years. How did what college did you go to?
I went to St. Munchins did the Leaving Cert. I didn't play rugby, which made me kind of a conscientious objector. I might as well have not gone to Vietnam. Because I was a big bloke and whatever. Did okay in St. Munchins, did quite well, enjoyed it. Got involved in the newsletter there. It was called The Tower, and I worked with a chap called Pat Carroll, who's still active in Limerick in business development or whatever. Went and did, I did civil engineering, headed off to Cork to do civil engineering, UCC, and the only reason is I didn't know what to do, and civil engineering didn't seem to be too narrow a field. Because I just didn't know what to do. And in those days, we didn't do too many personality tests. The joke at the time was, what do you say to an arts graduate? And you'd say, I'll have Coke with the fries. That was what we used to, everyone would say, right? So even though I should have done probably arts or Irish or history, something I really loved, but we were all shoehorned into the mathematical science subjects, which was good because I went to UCC, learned engineering. I'll skip to UCC quickly, but ended up coming back to Limerick, and I ended up working through scouting in a friend of mine set up a business called Arlanda Products, canvas products. I don't know if they're still going, but they started making scout tents and canvas products. And it was hilarious because I had an honours degree in engineering, and the guy next to me had a diploma in advanced electronics, and neither of us could get a job. So we were both inside in workspace in near the grain store near Charles Quay, you know, working away on the bales of canvas. And people would come in and they'd look at us. They wouldn't even ask us the price of a tent or a bag because of the perception that we were on the bales of canvas, stitching eyelets. It was so funny. So my sister at the time was working with Michael Punch and Partners, and Michael Punch was a great character, and he just basically said, get that young lad up here. Now, Mike was famous for the expletives, so I won't ruin your show by using a lot of them, but he would say, get that F guy up here. He shouldn't be making tents. So I got a job with Michael Punch, and that was phenomenal. I mean, Michael Punch was like, it was like boys club or whatever. He helped every single one of us, and if you were bright and energetic, he was always trying to move you on. So basically I got about a year there, and then he said, what are you going to do? Because you're not staying here. And he wasn't firing us. He was trying to create space for more young people to come through. So I got a loan myself, and I got a loan from Michael Punch, an interest-free loan, to get into the oil and gas industry, because Limerick was, oh God, in 1983, it was pretty miserable in Limerick. I mean, we were straightening bends and moving hedges, and like there was no suspension bridges being built in Limerick. It was pretty miserable. But I did a couple of highlights. I worked on the roof of Cardavon Church. If I don't know if it's still there, or the park. The Toblerone trusses are mine in the Parkway Shopping Centre. If anyone ever looks up from the roof and you see these Toblerones, they're mine.
Sorry, just allow me to come in on that, because Sarah Ward was giving you the thumbs up there around Caherdavin Church. I'm not familiar with it, but Sarah Ward says it's still standing to this day, and the Toblerone Trust is holding their own. So well done you. Well done you. I love, if I may, a couple of things just before we move on. I love that you're a rugby conscientious objector. Might as well not have gone to Vietnam. That's brilliant. And for those of you, Limerick is such a stronghold in terms of rugby. I mean, this guy really stood out for that. Civil engineering, Arlanda Products. Michael Punch seems to have been quite the man in his time. To bring, bring young fellows in like that, and then hoosh you out the far end, give you experience, and hoosh you out the far end to make more room for others. Happy days. That's a lovely contribution. So oil and gas, you mentioned oil and gas. Does this bring us to the North Sea?
Yes. Well, I went to Glasgow to do the course. It was fantastic. First time really away from home. I mean, Cork, like you could go home for your lunch from Cork, you know. Well, not quite, but Glasgow was a little bit more difficult. But 18 in the class, a Nigerian, a couple of Pakistanis, a couple of Indians, Scottish, Canadians. What a mixture. Very, very cold and miserable. I didn't understand that rain in Scotland was actually more miserable than rain in Ireland. There's a square in Glasgow called George's Square, and I would call it, you've heard of the Elephant's Graveyard, I would call that square the Umbrella Graveyard, the Umbrellas Graveyard. I mean, every bin would have 3 or 4 umbrellas stuffed into it where people had just given up. So I studied there, very good. I'll skip on, but I specialized, my thesis was in semi-subs, which are, if you think about it, they're drilling rigs that float out and then they let water into them and they half sink down. I won't bore you with the details, but I specialized in them, and Also what happened in Glasgow is I met my wife. She was from Australia, Alison, and she was doing midwifery. And basically that's where we met up, and we had a great time when we were studying. And then of course I ran out of money. Her visa ran out, so I ended up in Norway. So that was another interesting period. Probably the most important thing about Norway was I shared a house with 4 Scottish guys, and I drank my lifetime consumption of alcohol in that period. So people often think I'm a bit of a wowzer, as they say here in Australia, or a bit of a pioneer. I'm not anti-drink at all. It's just I've already had my quota. Fascinating Norway because there was nothing to do. I mean, socializing where I was cross-country skiing. Like you went out to the local park and on your cross-country skis. Alcohol was restricted, and I now know why. The sun would come up at 9:30 in the morning, down at 1:30, so 4 hours of a day. Now this is near Oslo. You could imagine what it's like further up, right? I get a nod from the lady from Sweden, I'm sure. So I found it a fascinating place, and an affinity with the Scandinavians. There was certainly an affinity. The Viking thing certainly was there. I didn't have any problem with them at all. I felt very comfortable, which was unusual, because when you travel around the world, some cultures you can connect with and click with, but I didn't have any problem with the Vikings. You know, it was great. So got a bit of money there. Got a bit of money together, which allowed me to head off to Australia. So I headed off to Australia. Now, this is where the big argument is. Did Alison want me to go to Australia, or did I chase her to Australia? This is the $6 million.
And come here, ladies and gentlemen, just let it be said that before Raymond came on live, he dispatched Alison and the rest of the family to McDonald's. So we can't get to the truth of this matter, right? Unless we bring Alison on next week, which could happen. All right, over to you. At your own risk. At your own risk. Continue.
Yeah. So basically, look, good times had by all, but we got engaged and we headed out, the young couple. My mother thought I was dead. I mean, she was very upset. Heading to Australia, you know, with this tropical bird or whatever, like just heading off to Australia in 1986. My mother just thought it was like the same as going to Van Diemen's Land. I mean, it was just like, it's very hard. I now understand it as a parent, but I didn't. I was the young guy, couldn't see outside my bubble at the time. My return flight with Qantas was £1,200 sterling. And that's to give you an idea how flights have come down. I've calculated that's somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 euros now. And it was an ordinary ticket. Right? Because you were on the space program if you were going to Australia at that stage, right? You were because no one, you know, that's why we all like Ryanair, even though we don't like Michael O'Leary, but we like Ryanair because he got the prices down. So we headed to Australia. Oh, that was quite a challenge, because Victoria it's all the secrets in the name. Even though Australia is a very Irish country, Victoria is very Victorian. So there's a kind of you pick up on a very, if you're sensitive, it's a British vibe, but it's not a nasty British vibe, but you're still very hard with the police look like the British police. There's and we were all, as you can imagine, at that period, things were pretty hot and heavy. You know, if you're flying to Australia, you had to fly through Heathrow, and like if you had to fly through Heathrow, you know what I'm talking about. They take the photo of you as you got off the plane, and they knew who you were by the time you got to the to the exit gate. Australia's a nice place, but found it very hard to settle in, because I'd gone from being sort of the Irish guy that had gone to Norway. Now I was the interesting guy in Australia. And this is the difficulty if you're Irish around the world, If you're Irish and you go to London, you're kind of number 2 and you slot in, unless you're a Terry Wogan. If you go to New York, you're number 1 because you're new. In Australia, you're meant to be a nice, funny guy. It's a kind of, no, it's changed a bit, but fundamentally you're meant to kind of fit into the niche. There was a comedian out here called Dave Allen, and he was on television night and day. And he has created this perception that the Irish guy is cute and shrewd and interesting and funny, but it's taken the likes of people like Alan Joyce in Qantas and certain very big success stories to try and change that perception. So at the time we got involved in a chamber in Australia called the Irish Australian Chamber, which is still going. I'm not active in it now. I kind of been there, got the t-shirts, kind of not, they're still all handing out business cards to each other. You know, they're still doing what we used to do. Whereas I kind of like just chatting to people now. I don't like, I'm fed up of the corporate scene, you know, filling tables and, you know, whatever. So a fascinating time, did everything there from big jobs, small jobs. One interesting thing is I was at a conference, I met the famous Red Adair, which was, and I can guarantee he had no eyebrows, if anyone knows anything about Red Adair, but he didn't have any eyebrows. And I still remember what he says. He says, know what you're doing and train your people well. That was all that was his summary of, and that's 30 years ago now, and I can still remember his talk. That was it. And he was a brave man.
Brilliant,
you know?
Brilliant. Come here, Raymond, this is lovely. It's around the world in 80 minutes and it's just fantastic. We're flying through. I love your perception. I love the fact that, you know, when you went to Scandinavia, you were just the Irish guy in Scandinavia, there was no issue because of the whole Viking, you know, and that's in a very positive way. We mean that in a very positive way because we're all connected. Number 2 in London makes perfect sense. Number 1 in New York, this is the Irishman on travel. And then in Australia, you're supposed to be the nice, funny guy. And I do remember Dave Allen. I saw James nodding away there because Dave Allen was the quintessential Irish guy, funny guy in Australia. Red Adair, no eyebrows. For those that don't know, he was famous for fires and putting out fires, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, he put the fires out in Kuwait. He's famous. There's a movie with John Wayne about him. And there's another joke which I won't do on this talk called Green Adair, but that's a very good joke. But you know what he did when the fires were lit in Kuwait, Colm, he was ingenious. What he did is he suddenly realized that he put the pipes in reverse. The pipes that were sending the oil to the coast, he suddenly put pumps at the end on the coastline, and he came up with, and he used all the pipes to pump water back into where the wells were on fire. But you still had to go in. You see, this is the bit, like it all sounds great, but someone had to go in and face the flames, you know, so it's not all academic, you know, serious stuff.
No. And that's our friend Red Adair. So listen, fascinating stuff. And thank you, Raymond, really very sincerely thank you for coming in. And because this allows everybody in the cafe and everybody who listens to this get to know the man behind the work. And I sort of want to bring you to the work, if you don't mind, of Tangible, if you're okay.
Tangible has evolved. I mean, I've had a few goes at Tangible. Essentially what it was, it's probably a link to my personality, which is I was always outgoing, people person, liked PR, liked negotiations, liked solving problems, liked the scouting. Like I enjoyed the camaraderie in scouting. But then I ended up with this profession of engineering, which was all detail and procedure and whatever. So I ended up with this like this daily conflict where I had all these qualifications in very nerdy, awkward kind of stuff. But there was this guy underneath the surface that kind of would rather do it like be Michal Mira Hertig or something like that. But there was no jobs, you know what I mean? There was no jobs. So essentially I migrated from design to project management, and then suddenly I got an opportunity in Australia to move into business development. And that was amazing because I devoured, when I got that opportunity, I devoured hundreds of books, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People, The Magic of Thinking Big, Think and Grow Rich, you know, Beware the Man Who Offers You, The Naked Man Who Offers You His Shirt. I mean, I could go on. There's all these books, they're phenomenal. And I just devoured them like I used to devour the engineering books. And basically, did well in Australia, and then in 1994 there was a recession here in Australia, and I took the opportunity. Now there's a little sad thing which I'll throw in just because it'll underpin my resilience. The reason we came back to Ireland in 1994 was shortly after arriving in Australia, my wife's father was killed in a boating accident. And what was traumatic about that, not so much that he was killed, because everybody has accidents or whatever, but the thing that caused the real hassle there was the body was never recovered. And the other survivor witnessed and said that he had died. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going into any detail. So there was no dispute that he had died, but there was no body recovered, right? And that created a situation where I was the young Aussie guy in Australia being integrated into a wider family network to suddenly 3 or 4 years later, I was the strong man at the circus psychologically. So that's what drove me back to Ireland in search of, I suppose, nourishment and support at an emotional level. And we went back to Dublin, and that was difficult initially. Returning to Ireland as an immigrant, you know, if you come back from Australia, you can't even say that now. Like, I reluctantly tell people I'm coming from Australia because it sounds like you're big noting yourself or you're kind of like when I was in Australia. I mean, it's just a place, and if you can afford the flight, you can kind of get here. But went back to Ireland, but because I'd done all that reading of the books or whatever, I had a particular take on engineering. So I got an opportunity with a company called Pettit's, E.G. Pettit and Company. They were a Cork engineering company, very, very conservative. I hope someone sees this and I can finally say, so conservative. They had a picture of Sean Lemass on the wall. You know, they were well connected, but in the 60s. Here we are 20 years later, and I got the job of trying to get them into the 20th century. And it was very difficult. But it was the same thing, that combination of having to deal with awkward engineers, but at the same time, kind of be bubbly, marketing, outgoing. And it was that. So that's always been my niche, Colm, where I'm not scared by awkward, difficult issues. And at the same time, I'm quite sanguine. Like before your meeting started there, you were all quite sanguine, enjoying yourselves. But that's me as well. It's just that because of the rigor of engineering, I've been drawn into the other area. So I've been doing that. I ended up being business development director in the Dublin office of Project Management Group, the big engineering company. My biggest win was the Xerox campus in Dundalk, which was like, I still remember winning that. I knew 2 hours before everyone else in the company, and I drove around Dublin drinking coffee and just keeping it to myself. I just held on to it. It's a kind of a weird feeling. And then once I told people, the joy nearly went, you know. And 18 months later, then I was nearly not allowed on site in Dundalk because they had hired so many people, no one knew who I was. So that was the classic thing. But Xerox was pivotal, Colm, because it got me up to Dundalk. And then it was announced by Bill Clinton. George Mitchell was on the board. And we got that job in 4th of July, 1998. But in early August, the Oma bomb went off. And we saved that project because all the Xerox personnel wanted to go home, and we wined them and dined them. We brought them to Johnny Fox's. We brought them to the theater, restaurants. We rubbed their tummies. We said it'll be okay. We just kept smiling, and we didn't even know whether we were right, but we just kept smiling. And the guy that saved that project was Martin Naughton from Glen Dimplex. He basically arranged a dinner and calmed them down. But it was touch and go because that was a huge investment for Dundalk at the time. It was a huge symbol of the future. But that got me into that whole north-south thing. And then when after a couple of more years of PM, I got a little burned out because the company got too big and there was too much expectation. So just to give you a sense of scale, when I won my first job, 132,000 punts it was, people bought me a pizza and we all had a big celebration. The week I left, I secured 10 million euros worth of work and I kind of got a nod and a smile. So like it was just weird. So that's when I made the decision to set up Tangible, and I went out helping small companies, and that was the first phase. Small companies coming in from the US or down from the north. Very simple, nothing too complicated, Colm, just I call it tummy rubbing or whatever you want to call it, or smooching or whatever. And then that gets me to probably 2008, which everybody here kind of remembers, where the whole clock stopped for me, you know.
And come here, before we go there, this is great stuff for our international audience. Some of the references may be lost, but it refers, that Omagh bombing refers to the troubles that existed for many, many years on the two parts of our island here. And I didn't realise that, you know, you'd been so close to it, dare I say, not geographically, but in terms of the work you were doing. So lots of stuff in there, Yeah, it's very real. It's very real, Raymond. And I love that phrase, by the way, tummy rubbing. That's just a nice phrase of looking after people. And I suppose that's really what you've been doing ever since. And I didn't realise that they were the early seeds of Tangible. That's where it began, sort of north-south. And now it spans the globe, is that right?
It is, yeah. But I think the reason why I referred to that incident with the Xerox and whatever is that, you see, I'm positive, but I'm not what I call happy clappy. I think this is the issue I think everyone's fighting with, you know, where people, it's like at school, the teacher keeps saying everyone's great, and then, but no one ever tells the kid that he needs to get his act together. So you've got this kind of fight going on all the time. Whereas the reason I mentioned Omagh and all that is being positive when the shit has absolutely hit the fan is the key thing, right? Being positive, and this is where Australia is going through at this very moment, after 28 years of continual economic growth. And I'm worried about young people. I meet them here, there, and the resilience factor is so low. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have a pandemic on my hand, but it'll be a psychological pandemic, right? So that's why I'm talking about the own, because we got that jobs, we created those jobs and built that thing, and we set up traffic lights outside the site, and the Ulster prods coming down to the rugby matches stopped at the traffic lights, looked in and saw Xerox, and suddenly saw development. And then that started my work later on in Tangible in Belfast. And that was my calling card. I was like Ray Houghton, you know, I had one goal, like I scored a goal in New York and everybody. So everybody would say, you know, what do? You say, I do business development. What sort of stuff? And then I milked it, Colm, over and over and over, because they'd been at the traffic lights looking at the site. So that got me going in Northern Ireland. And I then at one stage connected with a fellow called Keith Drury. He's now a professional artist, but then he was a Presbyterian minister. And I spent 18 months there meeting about once a fortnight. And we, just to get an understanding of the Protestant culture, because this is the weakness of the education system in the South. Like, everything would be fine if those funny people up in the North would only kind of join in the party, right? That's roughly the Irish education system, right? And it's only when you go up there and you suddenly realize that they've got their own world, right? And I got, you know, I'd say to the, like, I've got a rule of thumb that I say, if you were sorting out the Catholic Church, you'd bring in democracy. And if you were sorting out the Presbyterians, you'd bring in a hierarchy, right? Because because everybody up there, it's so democratic, you understand? And everybody's got an opinion, and that's why there's so much confusion, right? So, but I got to understand the Ulster Unionists, and that's mainly probably through my time in Australia. I kind of, because Victoria is kind of unionist light, if you know what I mean, and surviving in Australia is kind of a light form. I'm not talking about the darker, nasty end of orangism and whatever. I'm just talking about the middle bit. So I clicked. So basically, that got me going with Tangible, mainly helping people overcoming things. And then that went, at one stage I was doing business development for 7 companies. And of course, it was very stressful because they all wanted me on a Thursday afternoon. if we could only spread them out during the week. I remember one occasion being at a book launch or something in Cork with Gamma Construction, the Turkish company, then going to Cork Airport and flying to Belfast to go to a dinner on a little plane, and one of these little, I hope I can planes. It was one of those little short, I don't know if you've been on those short airplanes. Very stressful. And that went swimmingly, absolutely swimmingly, probably all the way through to 2007, 2008. But I knew it was bad in 2007. There was early warnings that, when you're meeting Polish guys building apartments for Polish guys, and they're it was just hype, and there was no logic or sense to some of the developments that they were doing. So we knew that it was, and we were all complicit in it in many ways. We were all in there in the bubble, and we were afraid to call it because the party might end, and by God did it end.
And by God did it end, yeah. And but yet here we are still today. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And again, I suppose I wish on behalf of us here in Ireland that some of our international guests knew more of the references here, but we don't have time today. But suffice to say, it's fascinating, snapshot of a time in Irish history. Raymond, great stuff. Tangible Today operates in Australia. It's basically a network. Am I right in saying, is it fair to say it's based around the Irish diaspora largely?
Yeah, well, you'll see I was introduced twice, and then people think I'm being kind of facetious or whatever with the Tangible Ireland and Tangible Your Global Partner. I mean, essentially, when I was based in Dublin, it was Tangible Ireland, and I worked on Ireland and all the global Irish cities. It was quite straightforward. But then I had an English guy, Robert Baker, came over to the summer school one year, and he gave the feedback, and he said the whole thing was wonderful, everything's great except the name, because he was British, you see. So all of a sudden, Tangible, the Ireland wasn't a help. And then the Aussies didn't take to it. Like, if you're Tangible Ireland in the US, by having Ireland on your URL, you rock it, right? In March and whatever. In Australia, I'm back to your Dave Allen's assistants, so it doesn't work. So I basically rebranded just for the Aussie market to Your Global Partner, and I've ran a few of the events that we've done, which I should backtrack and say that when the market collapsed for me in July 2008, I'd hoped that it would pick up in August, September, October, November. My last few quid, things were really tight. I had 1,800 euros in my business account, and just got a wake-up call. It was attached by the revenue just before Christmas, because they were trying to obviously organize. There was no money left in the economy. And if anyone was in the construction industry, you knew it all depended on who had the VAT. If depending on the food chain, whoever had the value-added tax at the time had the cash flow. If you'd paid your VAT, you were cruising. But if you hadn't paid your VAT, you were in serious trouble. So that's when I started ringing around, and I said, what are we going to do? And then I remember the movie Going My Way with Bing Crosby and Barry Fitzgerald, and they always organized a concert. Their solution to everything was a concert, right? And so I started ringing around and said, look, I'm thinking of doing something in January, first Thursday in January, called the Fight Plan, something positive, and I rang 16 people, Colm, and this is what was frightening. I got 16 yeses. Everyone was available and everybody agreed, right? And that's when I got really scared, because these were all the kind of what I call the front line, the advanced troops. These are the people, the movers and the shakers. And so we went and we did it on early January. It was great. So with about 70 people. Very good. We actually had lunch at that one, right? It was the last sting of the dying economy. We had lunch. I even charged people that. And so that was great. But that night when I went home after a big success in Dublin, we had all sorts of speakers. And there's plenty of photographs of that. It's whatever. But that night, Jan O'Sullivan came on telly and announced the closing of Dell in Limerick. So that's when I went and we organised an event for Limerick, and that was a great success as well. But it was the same issue. It was a combination of pragmatism, positivity, diversity, connectivity, creativity. We were just making it up, right? Just because I was back to scouting, I was lighting a fire. And you know, when you're trying to light a fire, you're not very sophisticated. You just throw everything you can find into the thing to see if it catches. So we did Limerick, that was okay. And then I sat around thinking, well, we've done Dublin, we've gone to Limerick, what do you do? And then I suddenly thought, you go to America. That's what you do. You go from Dublin to Shannon to America. So I arranged one for May in New York, and then basically the circus began. And just to give you an idea, we've now delivered 108 of these, Colm. So including summer schools. And the reason I don't like chambers of commerce is I don't need to know any more people, and that's not a reflection on anybody, is I just know too many people.
I love it, love it. Listen, congratulations, absolutely wonderful. Wonderful, a very rich story. And I don't know what expectations people had coming in here today to meet the big businessman in from Australia, but it's been just beautiful. It's been a very human story, which obviously has business connectivity all the way through it, but it's just gorgeous. And we wish you continued success and growth with Tangible. And it happens all over the world now. It happens in Limerick, happens in Dublin, happens in the North, happens in the UK, happens in the States, New York and San Fran, if I'm not mistaken, and of course down under.
That's right.
Yeah, so well done, well done. Boolabus, boolabus, boolabus. And folks, you need to check out Tangible. Listen, real pleasure, real pleasure. We're going to go to Q&A from the floor because I'm conscious of time, and we want to respect everybody's time in the cafe. You and I could chat for all day. Going to go to Q&A from the floor. Before we do that, Raymond, could I ask you, what are you taking from COVID? What are you taking with you from COVID, please?
I think it's probably an enforced retreat for the whole world. I'm noticing it in the street here in Melbourne. When I came in 2016, I was doing the Irish thing, saying hi to people in the street, or how's it going, or how, and I was getting these looks like, who's that weirdo with the funny accent? Now people are stopping, and we're having 2 or 3 sentences, and these are the people, the very same people that would have been walking past me before this. And I just think everyone, particularly here, 28 years of unbridled economic growth is a bit scary. That's nearly a whole generation and a half, Colm, of people they're very scared. And I think they're rediscovering relationships. I think that's the key thing. And it's enjoyable because it had got very, very transactional and it wasn't the Australia I left. It was totally different. Whereas, you know, so that's the thing. I think it's been now, but the government has managed it well here. Like when you think we've only 100 deaths, and like if you think about it, the US is 14 times the size of Australia. So that would mean if the US did what Australia had done, there'd be 1,400 deaths in the US. Now, you could even multiply by 10, still 14,000. It's not 120,000. So the Aussies have got on top of this very, very well. And there's a lot of respect for that, you know?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And thank you, Kathy Mera, for leading that Bula bus. And we feel for you in your country. We feel for you in your country. Raymond, thoroughly wonderful conversation. Thank you indeed for joining us for coffee in the cafe today on the Coffee at 11 show. Ladies and gentlemen, who'd like to comment or ask a question of Raymond? Eamonn Smith, thank you.
Thanks very much, Colm. Raymond, thank you so much for sharing this morning. I found it quite moving actually when you spoke about Alma and your presence in Dundalk, because I'm from Drogheda myself, so just down the road. So yeah, I suppose for our international friends, that was possibly Ireland's darkest hour in terms of terrorist atrocities, and that's amazing. Your own resilience and what I call your unfuckwittableness in that moment to benefit others. What I'd love to ask you, if I may, given that you're able to tap into that space of like when the shit hits the fan, you're able to do what's possible here, mood or mode. what's your go-to thing, let's say, for you getting yourself grounded, for you coming into the space, for you kind of, finding inspiration, not kind of getting all panicked and flustered? What would be your favorite or maybe one tip for your go-to grounding tool, let's say?
I think in spite of all the technology we've got, I am a great fan of, I'll use moleskin notebooks, but you know the type of notebooks that I'm talking about. They're not the ones we used to have at school where you rip a page out the back. You need a notebook that you kind of feel embarrassed if you lost it, or I don't know, you'd go back to collect it, one of those notes. But what I do is I do data dumps, Eamonn, and I just find it really does help, because I do lists, but I do really minute lists because it clears the head. You know what I mean? Get the new pair of runners, change the laces. And what it does is it declutters the brain. Because a lot, and it's not a very sophisticated thing, Eamonn, but what happens is it's like having too many windows open on your computer. You with me? That's what people, and they get all flustered with all the stuff. So what I do, first thing I do then is just go for a coffee, sit down, get the notebook out and write until and I only do bullet points, just, money, all the usual thing. And I find then when that's finished, poetry is another great thing. I find novels are too long, but I find I've now bought into a load of compilations of poetry, and I find loads of little nuggets in there, and they're so easy to kind of get hold of. Whereas a novel, you start it and then you mightn't get back to it, So there's two little simple things, but coffee is always great though. Coffee is good.
While you're saying poetry in your books, this is kind of a relatively last couple of years new thing for me. Books and journals and dumping. I even have one on the wall there. I have an A2 sheet and little post-it notes to break down every little bit, get it out of my head, dump it somewhere. But when you're talking about poetry, here's one I'm not sure if you've heard of, a book that I was gifted last year, like some people refer to him as the Punjabi Shakespeare, Rabindranath Tagore. You heard of Tagore? That's some beautiful stuff. Tagore. It's only a small little book, Tagore. And some of the poetry there, it's like, that was written over 100 years ago, and it still speaks volumes today about grounding and mindset and so on. So there's
okay. Lovely stuff. Yeah, lovely stuff. Lovely interaction. And I love the fact that as you were talking through there, people were putting up their journals and putting up their books of poetry and all sorts of stuff. Just fabulous. This man here, by the way, I'm renowned for having cups of coffee. This man here, I think, beats me in the cups of coffee stake. So, my friend, I'm coming to Melbourne next year, and we're going to have coffee together somewhere. You're going to bring me down to one of your coffee shops where you often see him putting up these posts, this delectable looking coffee and pastry, mind you. And he's his pen and
they've got it off pat. The one thing, Melbourne's got coffee under control. They really do. They have coffee under control.
I love it. There's a phrase. Melbourne has coffee under control. Happy days. We're a real joy, real lovely conversation. I'm going to go to Princess Shelley, if I may. Please, Princess Shelley.
Hey everybody, thank you Raymond. The Cafe at 11 show is alight with comments here from everybody joining us from all corners of the globe. Alice Kennedy, thank you for being here. Alice says good morning, happy Tuesday. So she's absolutely delighted to be here and says hello to everybody. We're going to go to John Webb in a moment. He said that it was great to see you being interviewed, and I'm going to come to you now in a moment, John. James Finnegan, who again is here each day, we were talking about, he said, and when you were talking about Scotland, he said Angela's Ashes would be almost considered a musical in Scotland, which is quite so thanks for that, James. And he went on to say Red Adair put out the oil field fires in the North Sea. So again, that was when we were talking about that. Eamonn popped in the links that everyone can access your social media platforms, and he's also put in the YouTube link there, everybody, if you'd like to copy and paste it, of Raymond speaking at the PM Summit in 2019. So thanks for that, Eamonn. You can access Raymond speaking at that. Kathy, who's joining us for her morning, very early morning coffee in the United States in New Hampshire, says thanks for letting us know how Scouts shaped your life. It brought back all the memories of my boys when they were in Scouts. So I love that we did that for you this morning, Kathy. That's fantastic. Karina Murray said that thanks for sharing your amazing story, really inspiring. And Ann Kristen in Sweden says, thanks for sharing. It's always a treat to listen to someone that's such a giver in mind and actions. Thank you. Isn't that lovely, Raymond?
Oh, that's great.
So I think at this point, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody, because it really is. James has said you've made the best of the structure in art engineering, added to the informality of art and human interaction, an inspiring story that has more chapters to come. And a lovely comment as well from Lisa saying, congratulations on your wins. That's Lisa Chalfa, a very interesting story, and wishing you continued success. So thank you for your great comment there. And Rona is saying Melbourne is a fantastic place. Love it. Thank you, Rona. And it's great to have you here in the cafe today. At this point, I'm going to invite John Webb O'Rourke. He's a previous guest on the show. I'm not sure if you were here and you remember everybody. He was a great guest, and he was quite delighted to see you being interviewed here on the show. So I'll invite you to unmute, unmute there if you like, John, and you can ask Raymond your question for a moment.
Thank you, Colm. Thank you, Shelley and Eamonn. And it is indeed a pleasure, probably long overdue, that this gentleman should be interviewed. I have to kind of give out to Colm a little and wonder why he wasn't number one, but there you go. In hindsight, I'd have to say that I consider Raymond a good personal close friend of mine, and I have to thank him, because there's a period of 3 days every August that Kilmallock becomes, my hometown becomes the centre of the world, as it hosts the Tangible Summer School. I'm just acknowledging that more so because I know the time, trouble and expense that this gentleman goes to make other people's lives better. He introduces them to a network of individuals through his friendship. He passed a comment there, Colm. I think he knows too many people. I mean, he's like the little black book for anyone in the world. You know, if you just need to know somebody, Raymond will know them. You know, in fact, he'll have their number. He'll be able to contact and introduce you. So in that respect, if anything arises from this, that can be a little bit of a payback to Raymond, because he is over in Melbourne. He is over there fighting the good cause, and we all have to live. And no better gentleman for getting advice and consultation, and indeed just a little bit of nudge in the right direction, because he'll give it to you, and it will be the best time that you've ever spent. And as I say, I just want to acknowledge it. When I saw that he was being interviewed, I knew it was going to be special, and we're all very busy, and I haven't been on as lot as I'd like to have been, and I've been following up, but I wasn't going to miss this one for the world. And
Oh, that's fantastic to hear, John. And let's give John a nice round of applause. I'm glad you made it work to be here today. And that's a lovely testimony,
suit you, Raymond,
isn't it? At this point, Colm, I'll hand back over to you, and thank you very much. Guys, it's everybody, it's you being here, it's our guest, but it's you being here and the valuable contributions you make, the comments and questions and the testimonials and remarks we get, like John popping in there. That's what really makes the cafe the scrumptious place that it is. It's back to you, Colm. Thank you.
Well said, Princess Shelley. Thank you for that. And one of my favourite parts of the show, indeed it was one of Princess Shelley's favourite parts of the show, Princess Shelley spot. But it's great. It's one of the audience favourite parts of the show, right? Anyway, it is lovely. It's lovely. So thank you for that. Eamonn Smith, thank you for that lovely perceptive question, and it opened up a lovely conversation. John Webb O'Rourke, always a pleasure, my friend. Delighted that you made it here today. One busy man, and thank you for coming in to honour our friend here. A couple of things. Angela's Ashes, the musical, is actually a thing. James Finnegan, it's actually a thing. Lime Tree Theatre, right? Commissioned it. Angela's Ashes, the musical, and it's huge success. Huge success. Raymond, I'm going to ask you one quick story. We've only got a few seconds, but a quick story. Through Tangible, you connected a couple of people together, and this, I believe, happened in New York. And all of a sudden, a $5 billion fund was opened up to tackle homelessness. Am I right in saying that? Can you touch on that for a minute?
Oh, well, look, essentially the guys, Brian Riley and Michael Durkin, the guys, a few years ago launched a press conference in Dublin, and they invited everybody, but because it wasn't along the approved lines of thought, nobody turned up. So they had everything ready, and Brian Riley rang me in despair, and I was in Melbourne, and I just thought about it. I thought, okay, No one's taking any notice of them in Ireland. And then I immediately thought of Parnell and I thought of De Valera, and both of them, when they were in trouble, went to America. So basically I rang back and I said, let's do exactly the same press conference in America, and I convened it. Like, I mean, literally I created an Eventbrite page. but what it did is it gave them enough, 13 of them traveled, and then they met, I'll say, I won't name the name because I'll get it wrong, but let me say they met the controller of one of the major New York pension funds. And the guy made a statement. He said, in Ireland, people take decisions, whereas in New York, people make decisions. And he just gave them enough oomph, and like, you can see what happened. But now all the mainstream media are on this story. But if you track it back, it had to be lit, the fire had to be lit in New York before the mainstream media in Ireland. So I personally believe the capital of Ireland is actually New York, and that the depot is in Dublin. Now that upsets a lot of people, but I personally believe the capital of global Ireland is in New York. And basically Dublin is the depot, right? So that'll wind up the crowd there.
Ooh, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it here first. And Rona's not so sure. Right, okay. Listen, fascinating stuff. And we could go deeper. So let's not. Let's call it. You all make up your minds. Come here, Raymond. Just fabulous having you on. And John Webb O'Rourke, I do apologise for not having this man higher up on the list. But you know what? Maybe it's best wine to last stuff. Maybe that's what we're talking about here. Wonderful to have you here, Raymond. Thank you for that. Folks, before I let you go, let me tell you what's happening on the Coffee at 11 show tomorrow. Karina Murray, she popped in earlier and she's coming back tomorrow. She had she mentioned something. Oh, there you are, Karina. Forgive me. Karina Murray, lovely to see you. Forgive me, I thought you had disappeared. My apologies, didn't see you there, but delighted that you're coming in to us tomorrow. And Karina is the founder of Anua Academy. And I won't get into all the detail here, but suffice to say it has a focus on the next generation. So I think it'll build nicely on what we're talking about here, and looking forward to the chat with you tomorrow, Karina. Thank you for being here today and for contributing. And we'll see you here in the morning, folks, for that. I want to thank the team as ever, Princess Shelley for producing today's wonderful show, Eamonn Smith for keeping us safe and secure, aka the Monk, and for interacting with our guest, Raymond Sexton. And of course the lovely Katrina O'Brien, our editor-in-chief, for making this beautiful by topping and tailing it and sending it out to social media later tonight. And of course wigwam.ie SME peer support for their ongoing support. Finally, bring the show to a close as I always do. Raymond Sexton, namaste.
Look, it's a joy. Thanks, Colm.